Mahatma Gandhi was the primary leader of India's independence movement and also the architect of a form of non-violent civil disobedience that would influence the world.
Until Gandhi was assassinated in 1948, his life and teachings inspired activists including Martin Luther King Jr. and Nelson Mandela.
Mahatma Gandhi, October 2, 1869 to January 30, 1948, was the leader of India's non-violent independence movement against British rule and in South Africa who advocated for the civil rights of Indians.
Born in Porbandar, India, Gandhi studied law and organized boycotts against British institutions in peaceful forms of civil disobedience. He was killed by a fanatic in 1948. In 1915 Gandhi founded an ashram in Ahmedabad, India, that was open to all castes. Wearing a simple loincloth and shawl, Gandhi lived an austere life devoted to prayer, fasting and meditation. He became known as Mahatma, which means great soul.
In 1932, Gandhi, at the time imprisoned in India, embarked on a 6-day fast to protest the British decision to segregate the untouchables, those on the lowest rung of India's caste system, by allotting them separate electorates. The public outcry forced the British to amend the proposal.
In the late afternoon of January 30, 1948, the 78-year-old Gandhi, weakened from repeated hunger strikes, clung to his two grandnieces as they led him from his living quarters in New Delhi's Birla House to a prayer meeting. Hindu extremist Nathuram Godse, upset at Gandhi's tolerance of Muslims, knelt before the Mahatma before pulling out a semi-automatic pistol and shooting him 3 times at point-blank range.
The violent act took the life of a pacifist who spent his life preaching non-violence. Godse and a co-conspirator were executed by hanging in November 1949, while additional conspirators were sentenced to life in prison.
Mahatma Gandhi's father, Karamchand Gandhi, served as a chief minister in Porbandar and other states in western India. His mother, Putlai Bai, was a deeply religious woman who fasted regularly.
At the age of 13, Mahatma Gandhi wed Kastaba Mukherjee, a merchant's daughter, in an arranged marriage. In 1885, he endured the passing of his father and shortly after that the death of his young baby.
In 1888, Gandhi's wife gave birth to the first of 4 surviving sons. A second son was born in India 1893. Kastaba would give birth to 2 more sons while living in South Africa, one in 1897 and one in 1900.
After struggling to find work as a lawyer in India, Gandhi obtained a 1-year contract to perform legal services in South Africa. In April 1893, he sailed for Durban in the South African state of Natal. When Gandhi arrived in South Africa, he was quickly appalled by the discrimination and racial segregation faced by Indian immigrants at the hands of white British and Boer authorities. Upon his first appearance in a Durban courtroom, Gandhi was asked to remove his turban. He refused and left the court instead. The Natal Advertiser mocked him in print as an unwelcome visitor.
A seminal moment in Gandhi's life occurred days later on June 7, 1893, during a train trip to Pretoria, South Africa, when a white man objected to his presence in the first-class railway compartment, although he had a ticket. Refusing to move to the back of the train, Gandhi was forcibly removed and thrown off the train at a station in Pietermaritzburg. His act of civil disobedience awoke in him a determination to devote himself to fighting the deep disease of color prejudice. He vowed that night to try, if possible, to root out the disease and suffer hardships in the process. From that night forward, the small, unassuming man would grow into a giant force for civil rights. Gandhi formed the Natal Indian Congress in 1894 to fight discrimination.
In 1930, Gandhi returned to active politics to protest Britain's Salt Acts, which not only prohibited Indians from collecting or selling salt, a dietary staple, but imposed a heavy tax that hit the country's poorest particularly hard. Gandhi planned a new Satyagraha campaign that entailed a 390-kilometer/240-mile march to the Arabian Sea, where he would collect salt in symbolic defiance of the government monopoly.
My ambition is no less than to convert the British people through non-violence and thus make them see the wrong they have done to India, he wrote days before the march to the British Viceroy, Lord Irwin.
The Salt March sparked similar protests, and mass civil disobedience swept across India. Approximately 60,000 Indians were jailed for breaking the Salt Acts, including Gandhi, who was imprisoned in May 1930. Still, the protests against the Salt Acts elevated Gandhi into a transcendent figure around the world, and he was named Time magazine's Man of the Year for 1930. Gandhi was released from prison in January 1931, and 2 months later he made an agreement with Lord Irwin to end the Salt Satyagraha in exchange for concessions that included the release of thousands of political prisoners. The agreement, however, largely kept the Salt Acts intact, but it did give those who lived on the coasts the right to harvest salt from the sea.
Hoping that the agreement would be a stepping stone to Home Rule, Gandhi attended the London Round Table Conference on Indian constitutional reform in August 1931 as the sole representative of the Indian National Congress. The conference, however, proved fruitless. Gandhi returned to India to find himself imprisoned once again in January 1932 during a crackdown by India's new Viceroy, Lord Willingdon. After his eventual release, Gandhi left the Indian National Congress in 1934, and leadership passed to his protégé Jawaharlal Nehru. He again stepped away from politics to focus on education, poverty and the problems afflicting India's rural areas.
As Britain found itself engulfed in World War II in 1942, though, Gandhi launched the Quit India movement that called for the immediate British withdrawal from the country. In August 1942, the British arrested Gandhi, his wife and other leaders of the Indian National Congress and detained them in the Aga Khan Palace in present-day Pune. "I have not become the King's First Minister in order to preside at the liquidation of the British Empire," Prime Minister Winston Churchill told Parliament in support of the crackdown. With his health failing, Gandhi was released after a 19-month detainment, but not before his 74-year-old wife died in his arms in February 1944. After the Labour Party defeated Churchill's Conservatives in the British general election of 1945, it began negotiations for Indian independence with the Indian National Congress and Muhammad Ali Jinnah's Muslim League. Gandhi played an active role in the negotiations, but he could not prevail in his hope for a unified India. Instead, the final plan called for the partition of the subcontinent along religious lines into two independent states, predominantly Hindu India and predominantly Muslim Pakistan.
Violence between Hindus and Muslims flared even before independence took effect on August 15, 1947. Afterwards, the killings multiplied. Gandhi toured riot-torn areas in an appeal for peace and fasted in an attempt to end the bloodshed. Some Hindus, however, increasingly viewed Gandhi as a traitor for expressing sympathy toward Muslims.